The Bible makes more sense if we look at it as a bunch of writers arguing with each other. This is not a religious channel, but it's not a religious channel. We've been trained to see the Bible as a single book that, despite its varied authorship, agrees with itself. Univocality is presupposed even without that assumption being deliberately stated, so we're not provided the language to question it. The idea that the biblical authors are arguing with each other is most apparent in the four Gospels. Believers especially want to harmonize these narratives as if they're just different perspectives of the same story. Yet they disagree the most on the major life events of Christ: the Nativity, the Baptism, the Crucifixion, and the Resurrection. It makes more sense when you acknowledge that they're not working with differing documentary sources. They have different ideas of what Jesus is supposed to be, and they're directly responding to each other. For clarification, despite their titles, the four Gospels authors are anonymous. I may use the title interchangeably with the author, but it's with a singular they-them, so it's not assuming any particular authorship. Dr. Dennis MacDonald proposed the controversial theory that the Gospel of Mark was structured like the Odyssey, making his main character similar to Odysseus. He also proposed that John is patterned after Dionysus. Scholars have proposed a hypothetical Q source that Matthew and Luke could have shared in addition to Mark, but no historical evidence of such a source has ever turned up, and a theory of origins works without it. Matthew takes the story from Mark, but he clearly has a different rhetorical goal. Matthew tries to correct some of the errors in Mark while introducing new ones that Luke will revert back to Mark. At Jesus' triumphal entry, Matthew uniquely mistakes the colt and donkey in Zechariah 9 as two separate animals. But even artist depictions tend to overlook this awkward portrayal in favor of a single animal. Matthew's Gospel is structured like the Book of Chronicles, beginning with a genealogy and ending with a commission like the Edict of Cyrus the Great. Matthew constructs a lengthy Sermon on the Mount, and most of the parts of it not shared by Luke can be found to have parallels in Jewish oral tradition later recorded in the Talmud. Matthew seems to be trying to cast its main character as a Jewish rabbi. If I were taking a shot in the dark at any specific one, I would guess it's Hillel the Elder. Luke sees what Matthew does, but seems to want to improve it, and at the same time doesn't care if this improvement contradicts it. Luke sees Matthew borrow from Josephus at the Nativity and the Second Coming, so Luke refers heavily to Josephus throughout both Luke and Acts. Luke has no problem introducing a completely different genealogy from King David onward, a different nativity that people have tried to harmonize since the early days of Christianity, and a completely different demise of Judas Iscariot, which, unlike modern apologists, early Christians did not seem to care if they contradicted each other. In Matthew 27, Judas hangs himself out of guilt after trying to return the blood money to the chief priests, and so they buy a field with it to bury foreigners in. But in Acts 1, Judas buys the field of blood where he dies. Likely before Luke and Acts were written, Papias of Hierapolis had no problem contradicting Matthew. Papias, the disciple of John, recounts, "Judas was a terrible, walking example of ungodliness in this world, his flesh so bloated that he was not able to pass through a place where a wagon passes easily, not even his bloated head by itself. For his eyelids, they say, were so swollen that he could not see the light at all, and his eyes could not be seen, even by a doctor using an optical instrument, so far had they sunk below the outer surface. His genitals appeared more loathsome and larger than anyone else's, and when he relieved himself there passed through it pus and worms from every part of his body, much to his shame. After much agony and punishment, they say, he finally died in his own place, and because of the stench the area is deserted and uninhabitable even now. In fact, to this day, one cannot pass that place without holding one's nose, so great was the discharge from his body, and so far did it spread over the ground." We're often led to interpret the version in Acts through the lens of harmonization, so even when we separate it from Matthew, we don't read it as happening later over a period of time. But the narrative in Acts is parenthetical and not necessarily in sequence. A slow, painful death was probably a more appealing fate than a quick suicide. The version in Acts is much shorter than Papias. If it was known to Luke, then it may be because of Luke's idiosyncratic resistance to recycle details, and they wanted to use the detail about worms for the death of Herod in Acts 12. But it's also strikingly similar to older narratives which would have been known to Papias and Luke. We first see this in an incomplete 5th century BCE text called The Story of Ahikar. I'm of the opinion that the sources of the Bible are much later than most people think. For instance, I don't think the Babylonica preserves fragments of surviving materials that could have influenced the creation story in Genesis. I think the Babylonica itself could be the direct source. And rather than the story of Ahikar, I think Luke may have been more directly influenced by its literary descendant, the life of Aesop. The life of Aesop, or the Aesop romance, was a fictional biography about the writer of Fables. It was a folk book that belonged to no one, or in other words, an open system that was constantly being rewritten. The variations are so widespread that, for all we know, the opposing death of Judas and Matthew could have been an alternate life of Aesop. Luke's original material seems to be influenced by Aesop in many places. There's a possible reference to the fable of the quack frog in Luke 4:23. Luke has the most parables of any gospel, and 18 of them are unique. But Luke also goes beyond the pithy parables of Mark and Matthew, telling longer stories like the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, and Lazarus and the rich man. Jesus saying, "How foolish you are and how slow of heart," is a stock phrase borrowed from several of Aesop's fables. And the incident, unique to Luke, where the people of Nazareth try to throw Jesus off a cliff, is just like the death of Aesop. I think this demonstrates a lot of evidence to indicate Luke may be trying to cast its Jesus as another Aesop. There are more comparisons we can make, even within the same books, but this shows that the Gospel writers thought Jesus was more elastic, flexible for different target audiences and communities. They probably would have been the first ones to reject attempts to harmonize the Gospels, since their rhetorical aim does not seem to have been agreement with each other. This was a framework that came about later when a more centralized church needed the illusion that there had only ever been a singular Christianity. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I hope this has been informative. And thank you for watching to the end.